So next we're going to have a panel, the title of which I think everybody in this room will identify with. It's Living with Narcolepsy, which is something that we all live 24/7. And it's going to be led by Dr. Chad Ruoff. Some of you may recognize Dr. Ruoff from some of the webinars that he did for Narcolepsy Network. Fantastic webinars during the time when we couldn't meet in person like this, and it's wonderful to be back together. Dr. Ruoff is an internal medicine physician at the Mayo Clinic. He treats a wide variety of sleep conditions and is actively engaged in research and education. And he's co-authored multiple publications, including topics on narcolepsy. So let's welcome the doctor, and also I think either he or the other folks on the panel will introduce themselves. So let's welcome Dr. Ruoff. Oh, just one more thing before I do that. We will shortly have index cards on the table. If you have questions, please write them down as the panel proceeds, and hold your hand up with the card. We'll come and get those, and then we'll make sure they get to the panel at the right time. Here's Dr. Ruoff and the panel. Thank you.
Howdy. Everyone hear me okay? I can hear myself, so I think you guys can hear me, I hope. All right, so thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me back. It's always nice to be invited once to give a lecture to a group of an audience. It's really nice to be invited back, especially if it's the same topic and you already have the PowerPoint done. All right, so really this is all about the patients, right? So we're going to start off with Chris. He's going to introduce himself, and then we'll go down the line. And if this is a hit, this will be judged by a hit if they do most of the talking and I do very little of the talking.
My name is Chris Ottoman. I'm 43, from Cleveland, Ohio. I have type 1 narcolepsy that I was diagnosed back in 2003. Is it on? Anybody hear me? All right. Should I repeat?
Yes.
All right. My name is Chris Ottoman. I'm 43, from Cleveland, Ohio. I have type 1 narcolepsy, and I was diagnosed back in 2003.
Can you hear me? No. Okay. Now? No? Oh, Christine can hear me. Okay, good. Hi, I'm Sabrina Hope McDougall. I'm 44 years old from Sonoma County in Northern California, and I was diagnosed with type 2 narcolepsy in 2017, but we're now thinking that I'm really type 1. So we're kind of not sure if I'm a 2 or a 1 at this moment.
So we all have our same mic. It's really hard to hear you.
Oh.
Just sit down.
That works.
And then I guess I'll have this one.
Thank you.
Can you? All righty then. I'm Herlesia Hardaway. I will be 65 in 2 months. Thank you very much. And I am from Camden Point, Missouri, which is a little country town in Kansas City, Missouri, and I was diagnosed with narcolepsy type 2 in 2007, and after the last, what's that doctor name again? After Dr. Thorpe, I believe I'm type 1 also. But anywho, whatever it is, I got narcolepsy.
I'm Ryan Ensminger, and I'm 20 years old from Portland, Oregon, and I have type 1 narcolepsy, and I believe I was diagnosed back in, I want to say 2019, so it's been a few years. 2017, so yeah.
All right, thank you. So how we're going to do this, panel format. So I'm going to give a little blurb, as I was telling my mom earlier, blah, 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 and then I hand it over to the patients, and they're going to give the more important thing, the more salient features, the real life experiences. And then we'll go through, we're going to basically cover the pentad. So everyone in this room should just be able to rattle out the pentad, if not today, by tomorrow when you leave, and be able to answer whether you have any of those, any of the features of the pentad. All right, so what is the pentad? Hopefully everyone in here can already say this, and this is just kind of a review. Excessive nighttime sleepiness, cataplexy, disrupted nighttime sleep, sleep-related hallucinations, and sleep paralysis. All right, here goes my blurb. and then I'm going to hand it over to the patients. This is where I'm going to talk the most, is on daytime sleepiness. So let me see if I got a pointer here. That says danger. Something on here says danger. What happens when I push danger? All right, so what are some of the challenges with daytime sleepiness, right? So think of this from a clinician's standpoint, but then also think of it as a caregiver trying to understand what your loved one's going through and everything, and how to disentangle this and come render a diagnosis. So how do you define it, right? So with a patient sitting in front of me, in my experience, sometimes it's challenging to differentiate sleepiness versus fatigue. Excessive sleepiness versus excessive sleep quantity, right? So there's a new focus on how much does someone sleep, I think. We're talking about that more and more, at least the researchers and the clinicians are, and that should be a target, a measured target perhaps. And then it's a common, some other challenges that it's really common in the general population, right? Fatigue is like one of the number one complaints that a primary care doctor hears. How in the world does a primary care doctor find the person behind, I'm fatigued or I'm sleepy, and then that primary care physician hears they're fatigued? I have another patient saying they're fatigued. How do they find that patient with narcolepsy or help that patient? It's challenging, so you can empathize with that primary care practitioner a little bit. And also daytime sleepiness. The challenge there is it's associated, patients with psychiatric and medical disease often have fatigue sleepiness as well. And narcolepsy type 1, type 2, which has been replicated in numerous countries by numerous people by different methods, is associated both with psychiatric and medical illnesses. So how do you disentangle this mess, arguably? In sleep medicine, I'm sure many of you in here can attest to this, and I'm probably guilty of this as well, so I'll come out and come clean. Most often you see a sleep doctor, they're going to say you have sleep apnea. At least that's what they're thinking when you first present with excessive daytime sleepiness. They're going to search high and low to see if there's any snoring at all, and they are going to try with all their might to attribute it to sleep apnea. Again, they're going to try with all their might to, and I'm guilty of it, right? Or they're going to say it's a medication effect, or they're going to say it's your insufficient sleep, you're not getting enough sleep, or it's your social jet lag, not getting enough sleep during the week and then playing catch up on the weekend thinking you're doing a good thing, but you're actually setting yourself up for failure because Sunday night when you have to feel good on Monday morning, you're setting yourself up for failure because you're not going to sleep that well because you spend all weekend catching up. When the weekend's when you should be having fun, blah, blah, blah. Or some other comorbid condition, which all these are definitely points that you have to kind of methodically go through. Is it Parkinson's, God forbid, or something like that, or some other medical illness that hasn't fully presented itself? All right, so I have a couple more blah, blah, blah slides. Chris, hold on. So general population, guys. So, and this was around before we really started associating narcolepsy with comorbid conditions like psychiatric and medical illnesses. That font's probably way too small. I see some squints. I apologize. So what are the predictors in the general population for excessive daytime sleepiness? What do you think the number one is? You can read my first bullet point. Depression, independent of medications, stronger effect in the younger folks. This is general population, guys. We'll get to narcolepsy in a sec. BMI, that's no surprise. Age, subjective estimate of sleep duration, again, no surprise. Diabetes, smoking, probably self-medicating perhaps in general population studies. And last but not least, and you can share this with all of your sleep apnea, sleep doctors, sleep apnea is the last one as far as predictor for excessive daytime sleepiness in the general population. What are some of the predictors of remission? Well, you can read the predictors of sleepiness, and you can figure out what the predictors of remission for daytime sleepiness is going to be. Normal weight, less hypnotics, hypertension, I can't figure that one out. But since there's so much buzz around CV, cardiovascular effects in narcolepsy, it's an interesting one. Increased nighttime sleep duration, no surprise. Get more sleep, feel better, hopefully. Decreased insomnia, decreased depressive symptoms. Again, that relationship between psychiatric illnesses and sleepiness. And the point of this bottom part of this slide is that in general population, excessive daytime sleepiness is quite common, but it can remit. So in this one study, 25% or so had their daytime sleepiness on follow-up go away. That's an important point. both for the general population, but I think also for narcolepsy. Because as you've learned today, there's one type of narcolepsy that we really understand well, but there's a lot of other CNS hypersomnias that we don't understand. And so you have to keep this in mind. This is why I think this applies, some of this general population data probably applies to some of you in this room. We're trying desperately to figure out the underlying mechanism or pathophysiology of these diseases, but we're not there yet. So you got to remember, 25% can remit, general population data. All right, I added too much blurb here. Another study, I'm going to fly through this. Yeah, so this is starting from the top, basically, taking a general population study of about 15,000 people. How many of them are reporting sleepiness? And then if you add a frequency of at least 3 times a week, then how many people do you have? And then if you exclude any other causes in this study, you end up with about 1.5% of the general population likely has a CNS hypersomnia that would meet criteria. So that's you guys, that's this panel, 1.5%. But getting back to that primary care's dilemma, a lot of people in this study, 30% are complaining about excessive daytime sleepiness. So it requires many more questions. Well, what's the frequency? Well, eliminate this comorbid. And then you get down to that 1%, which is what we're going to talk about today. And then narcolepsy, this slide, I just want, hopefully we'll cover these other things that aren't in the pentad, sleep attacks, automatic behaviors, how restorative are your naps, sleep onset REM periods, we've talked about that a little bit today as well. And then I was a little, I'm gonna come back to this slide. I think it's really neat, especially, it's a neat time in sleep medicine and in CNS hypersomnias because there's so many medications in the pipeline. So I did wanna kind of review this. And just as a plug for what in clinical trials for CNS hypersomnia, the MWT is used, which, who in here has had an MSLT? So what's the mantra there is basically try to fall asleep, right? And an MWT, which is used in the clinical trial, so if any of you are interested in participating in a clinical trial, it's gonna be basically stay awake, right? Sit in a really comfy position and try to stay awake. My gosh, we're torturing you. But I was going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like in CNS hypersomnias and narcolepsy versus general population, but we're going to skip that. So, but I'll come back to it. This is the most important part of this, patient stories. So Chris is up to bat first, and Sabrina's on deck, I think. Next. Go, Chris. Go time.
So severe EDS is the reason why I sought help back in 2002. I kept dozing off as I drove to work. Luckily, I never had an accident. I don't know how I never had an accident. Also, the final straw was I was on a one-on-one meeting with the plant manager where I was working, and I fell asleep. So he knew something was wrong. I knew something was wrong, so I went and got tested, and luckily I got, diagnosed with narcolepsy. But, once I got diagnosed, I was able to get on a treatment plan, and it helped a lot. I mean, the only problems I had were on airplanes, trains, cars, anything that moves, I'd fall asleep. I mean, I remember being in Taiwan, falling asleep on a train, and waking up to some lady shaking me awake, speaking, I have no clue, but I had reached the end of the line. I fell asleep. So it wasn't bad up until about 2016, my symptoms started getting much worse. I had some other health issues going on. I started to fall asleep at work. Waiting for traffic, I'd fall asleep. Really anywhere. I had a tough time with at work with figuring out what I actually that's for my another point, so I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I mean, I'd go out to lunch, I'd fall asleep, and sometimes I'd wake up and it was already the end of the workday. I'd missed the whole second half of work. Sometimes I wouldn't even make it to work. I'd have to stop on the way to work, take a nap. I tried everything, having my medication adjusted, tried new medication. None of it really had worked for me, but I was able to basically what I've found is that I'd be able to, what would help is removing a lot of my stress, getting a routine, especially in sleep times, And I think that's about it. Can't remember.
How long, when you went to your primary care doctor, just to kind of make it relevant to my slides, I mean, did you just say I'm sleepy, and they referred you right there? Or
Well, that's the thing. I don't remember. I mean, I think I went
Pretty quick.
it was when my wife and I lived in Kentucky. We had just gotten there, and we had to travel an hour and a half to Lexington to get to a doctor. And I can't remember if I saw a primary care doctor and they sent me to a sleep specialist, or if I just went straight to a sleep specialist. But luckily, it was the first
Pretty
sleep
quick.
specialist I went into, and he tested me and realized I had narcolepsy. So I know I'm unique in that aspect with most everybody here, but yeah.
Yeah, mine was a little bit different. We know my thyroid is great, and I don't have mono because I got tested for that regularly for several years because saying I was tired, they would test for that. And then it'd been a couple months, so they would test for that again, just in case something had changed. It hadn't. My thyroid is still fine. Don't have any problem with mono or my thyroid, still haven't. And so it was quite a few years before they figured out I am low iron, so they would just keep blaming, maybe because your iron's low, maybe because your iron's low. And we would put me on iron, and I'm still tired. I'm still falling asleep places. I'm still doing all these things. And so finally, my mom had been diagnosed with sleep apnea, and we have the same doctor. She's like, I don't think there's any chance you have sleep apnea, but just in case, let's go ahead and send you for a test. And I didn't have sleep apnea, but when I got to the sleep specialist, and part of it's my fault, there's some really weird things that happen, and so I didn't say some of the crazy stuff that goes on, because I didn't want to get locked up. I didn't want to say I can't tell the difference between dream and reality, because that sounds weird. But once I started talking to him and was saying how, I fall asleep all the time and I can't stay awake, or I go in and out of dreams more than I should. Or when I fall asleep, like if I were to fall asleep right now, I'd hear what you all were talking about and I wouldn't know I was asleep until I tried to answer. And I suddenly realized, I'm not talking, I'm asleep. So that's kind of how my daytime sleepiness works. Or my mom and my dog now know if I'm gone for a little too long or I'm quiet for a little too long, they need to come search the property to see where I might be. And am I still doing what I'm supposed to be doing, or am I asleep somewhere? Because I've been asleep, random places that I'm not supposed to be asleep. So that's kind of how my excessive daytime tiredness works. Needless to say, I'm a teacher and I'm not allowed to teach at this time because they don't want you working with kids when you don't always stay awake. So that's my excessive daytime sleepiness.
Now, Ryan?
Yeah, so I would say my symptoms for excessive daytime sleepiness began around my last year in middle school. So I believe I was 14, and I knew I was having these symptoms, and as far as just interpreting what those were, I think a lot of it I associated with, I'm going through puberty, like this is pretty normal, like, just growing. And so I kind of associated with that. And even like, I surprisingly knew, I was familiar with narcolepsy, like only knowing, I think, more just what people assume it is rather than what it actually is. And so I remember like one day asking my parents, like, hey, like, do you think I might have it? And they're like, oh, like, you don't, like, you'd be falling asleep like all the time, like super frequently. And so there was I guess a bunch of different things that might have, naturally caused me to like dismiss or maybe like underestimate the amount of sleepiness I actually was having. And then I guess it got into high school where these symptoms exacerbated significantly. So I was falling asleep in class, having to go to the bathroom literally just to find a spot to sleep without feeling humiliated. Literally during my driver's ed exam, which I surprisingly passed. Yeah. So yeah, I guess a lot just, that's when I realized it started becoming more abnormal, though I think I was really just fearful to actually, confront that and just seek medical attention at that point, because, at that point I was doing pretty well in school. These indicators were, kind of telling me that I'm still doing well in school, my life still feels normal, so, it's probably just a phase or that everyone else is probably experiencing. And even just with my friends too, at times, when we'd hang out and such, when I would, get really tired and have these episodes, I was kind of just the photo op for them, and those moments really sucked, even though I would try to, laugh with them as well, even though it necessarily wasn't funny. But yeah, I guess it got to a point where these symptoms just obviously exacerbated in high school. My grades were, I was suffering to, keep up with school, and I'd say it got to that point where I really, pushed my parents to begin seeking medical attention. And back to what Dr. Thorpe was saying about the, indicators of excessive daytime sleepiness, I was originally diagnosed with sleep apnea. And so my doctor was persistent that I just had sleep apnea, that's what I clearly showed on the test results. And it continued, I kept having these very, exacerbated symptoms of sleepiness. And I even went to an oral, a dentist who does oral appliances and such, and he even said himself that, this is extremely abnormal to be this tired, even having sleep apnea. And so I went to a bunch of different other places from, I believe I went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor, quite literally everything, trying to search, the planet for what exactly was, my body was doing. And so it finally, I brought this to my doctor's attention that it was not just, was not just sleep apnea. I was using a CPAP as literally a 16-year-old, which probably not many had, many my age were using, wasn't really improving much. And so finally, after, I believe, taking 3 months off of school to address these, these medical barriers, finally, by the same doctor that originally said I didn't have narcolepsy, had diagnosed me with it after doing the MSLT and everything. So that is my experience with excessive daytime sleepiness.
Question just with brief answers, but first you, Ryan. You mentioned falling asleep and going to the bathroom and taking a nap. I mean, are your naps restorative? I mean, can you get a 10-minute nap, and can you just talk about, are naps really restorative for you? Can you knock one out in 10 minutes and wake up and feel amazing, or?
I would say prior to taking medication, they were a lot more restorative, whereas now I feel I still get some sense of feeling refreshed afterwards, though I don't think not to the same extent as before taking medication, because now I'm I will only have those episodes a lot less infrequently, or maybe once during the day, which I think I'm a lot better at kind of gauging when I should take the nap. Even if I'm not necessarily feeling super tired in the moment, I know that it's probably best to at least take a nap then, versus waiting till I get extremely tired. And it's a lot of it is just kind of having to do with timing and adapting to your own lifestyle needs. And so I would say yes, and that's, to answer your question, restorative in some sense.
Yeah. But more so off meds, which is interesting.
Yeah.
How about in the audience? Who in the audience, and look around to see the answers, and if you don't feel like sharing your information, then don't raise your hand. But who in the audience takes a scheduled nap? I think there's value, and I'm talking again. This is very hard for me to show this much restraint, but is the a scheduled nap? I think it has psychological implications not only for the person themselves, the patient with narcolepsy, but also for the caregivers around you. You establish this expectation. Oh, it's 12 to 1. Ryan's taking his nap, and so there's no. It's just kind of like Ryan's eating breakfast. Ryan's taking a bath. You know, it's just what we do. It's what he does. And so I think there's value in that. But, you know, I see a lot of patients that push through and don't succumb to the nap and don't take it on a scheduled basis, and there's some value in that, I think. Anyone else on the panel want to comment on napping or anything related to excessive daytime sleepiness? Just keep it a little short, though.
Sure, I'll do a little short something. So anyway.
She'll do anything but short.
but yeah, okay, for some reason on Sunday, between 3:30 and 4:30, my body decides you're going to take a nap, whether you want to or not. And so I'm sitting there, and like my first warning is I feel this little thing across my eyes. I'm going like, okay, let me get up and try to do something. But my tricks don't work at that time. So then my second one is this deep yawn. And I'm going like, oh boy, here it comes. Then the next thing I know, I'm waking up. And last week, how I found out I fell asleep, Jennifer Hudson comes on at 2 o'clock. Kelly Clarkson comes on at 3 o'clock. When I first started falling asleep, Jennifer Hudson was just announced, and when I woke up, Kelly Clarkson was going off. And I'm going like, I've been asleep for 2 hours. So it's like it'll come and go, and then but the majority of the time I can trick my brain to be like, okay, I'll set the timer on the kitchen stove, and then I'll sit and do a project for about 45 minutes to an hour. The timer goes off, I get up, and I can do something like take dishes out of the dishwasher or put dishes into the dishwasher, wash the pots and pans or whatever, and then I can stay awake for another hour or so. And so I kind of like develop these little tricks, but on Sunday, from 3:30 to 4:30, there are no tricks. Okay, so I don't know if any of you have discovered little tricks of how to stay awake at times so you don't sleep as much. But I remember the bathroom thing when I worked at the post office. It's like, okay, if I just go and take a little short nap. And then a lot of times I would feel enough to be able to do a couple more trays of mail. And then sometimes I wouldn't. So I get where you're coming from.
All right. Who in here, naps are refreshing? Question for the audience. Raise your hand high. Raise your hands higher. Probably more important, are naps unrefreshing? Raise your hand if naps are unrefreshing. Got it. Who takes a nap longer than 30 minutes a day?
Sometimes it happens.
Who avoids a nap? And I'm asking these questions
I do.
for me selfishly, avoids a nap, because if they do, it's going to last hours and hours, and it doesn't really make them feel better, and it's just a form of torture. Got it. All right, let's move on. So thank you so much for sharing your stories related to sleepiness and napping and whatnot. All right, we're going to move on to the next topic is cataplexy. And so you've heard today, and I'm just going to be quick with this. Positive humor is the most common trigger, right? What is a trigger? Kids around onset might not have a trigger. That's very unusual to not have a trigger for cataplexy, but usually it's humor. Does anything happen when you laugh, tell a joke, say something funny? I almost say that like automated. That's how I ask that question. What muscle groups? So those are the muscle groups that are most commonly affected. So a knees buckling kind of thing, and then maybe the arms, and then the head shoulder. Shrug. I'll let Chris maybe demonstrate it to show you what his looks like. Sometimes I find you can describe what it looks like, and if you just can act it out, it's even better. Duration. So typically the duration is 5 to 30 seconds. That's the most common. If it's much longer, it's a little unusual or atypical. If someone abruptly stops antidepressant, venlafaxine or whatnot, then you can get rebound cataplexy. I think that's like a sleep medicine emergency. Is someone with narcolepsy type 1 is calling for their Effexor or venlafaxine refill or something. That's like an emergency within sleep. Frequency, so most get it, 1 per day to several per week. That's kind of the average. But you can see there's some people that rarely get it, and it's not really that big of a symptom, a concern to them. All right, I flew through that. I did a good job there. I give myself a gold star. And so now we're going to hear from the patients. First up to bat is going to be none other than the lovely Chris.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
When I look back, cataplexy was definitely the first symptom that I can remember, that I could recognize having. And that, I remember back in junior high, like especially whenever, laughing, of course, was a big trigger, where I'd just feel weak in the knees, droopy in the face. With sports, like I was a wrestler, and whenever before a match, I'd try to get really excited, really pumped up, and I just found myself like, falling down to a knee right before the match, and that, and lifting weights, like my brother would always try to get me all excited, and then I'd drop a weight on me that I just did no problem the few minutes beforehand, and I didn't know what that was at the time. To be honest, cataplexy is a symptom that I misunderstood for so many years, even after I got diagnosed with narcolepsy. I always pictured cataplexy as the where you fall down on the ground, can't move. Not that, but now later on I learned that. I did have that once in a while, but later on I learned that the weak in the knees, the drooping of the face is the big one for me. Slurred speech, dropping things, that those were symptoms of cataplexy. And I was so confused about that for so long, like especially recently when my symptoms have gotten worse. Like I actually thought I was having micro strokes because of my face and the slurred speech, and luckily that's not the case. It was just my cataplexy coming back in. Let's see here. I know I had some things done. I have to try to talk fast because my brain kind of fogs over really quickly, so I don't remember what I was going to say. The one thing that's kind of made it so like my cataplexy has been hard to recognize is right basically when I started taking treatment for cataplexy, I also took some anxiety medication, and that really helped my cataplexy. If I miss my refill on my medicine, I will have honestly notice my cataplexy return. I find that anxiety also aggravates my cataplexy. Otherwise, I haven't really been able to find anything besides the anxiety medication that helps.
And then Sabrina, do you want to talk a little bit about your experiences?
I thought I didn't have cataplexy because I thought it could only be with the laughter and falling down, and that was all that it was, right? So that's not me. But it was at last year's patient panel on cataplexy that all of a sudden I found out, dropping things, that's me. And slurred speech and stuttering, that's definitely me. And the eye twitching, and mine is actually triggered more by fear and startle. So, and I startle really well. Please don't test that. Please don't. It's not hard to do. My poor mother's getting a startle response just from all the time she happens to walk into a room and I scream in her house. It's bad. So it's really easy to startle me, but like I'll grab the counter we found because I'm scared I'm gonna fall backwards. And so I happen to just grab the counter like I'm tending to do now. But all of those things, and so I'm realizing I'm thinking I do have cataplexy, but I didn't know that it was something that wasn't what was that story image of cataplexy. So there's more to it than I think what we're sometimes given in the brochure when we first get diagnosed and they say, do you have this? No? Okay, then you're type 2. Maybe not. So just heads up.
And then Sabrina, Herlicia, if we have a little bit of time, I'll let you talk about your cataplexy. but we're going to, for the sake of time, we're just going to move on to disrupted nighttime sleep, fragmented sleep. Who in this room has struggling to stay awake during the daytime, but fragmented sleep, can't stay asleep at night? And those of you with your hands up, keep your hands up. How should I ask this question? Who still has that despite medications?
Nighttime meds?
Nighttime, yeah, despite all your medications for fragmented sleep, for narcolepsy. Who has disrupted nighttime sleep and who still has it despite meds? And not very many hands went down. Interesting. All right, so disrupted nighttime sleep. So we don't really have a scale. We have some metrics on PSGs. Dr. Maskey, who's going to talk later, she's done a lot of this research with Dr. Mignot and looking at fragmented sleep. We have various objective metrics, but I don't have a question that I can ask you to say, yes, you have it. Now, clinically, I just really very simplistically ask how many times you wake up throughout the night, right? Do you have trouble falling back to sleep, et cetera? Does it bother you? Is it disruptive? Do you get aggravated? Things like that. But we don't have a way to really define this. So that's something the field sorely needs for both pharmaceutical research and just good patient care. The prevalence, look at that prevalence. Who was that I was talking to earlier? There he is. A wide prevalence. So 30 to 95% of patients with narcolepsy report disrupted nighttime sleep. That's a huge range depending upon how you define it, right? Subjective, objective. And how does it differ from insomnia subjectively? We've coined this term disrupted nighttime sleep, or fragmented sleep, but how does that differ from insomnia? So let's hear from the patients themselves. I think for this one, we're going to start with Chris. Chris, bless you. What's your story?
Well,
let's limit it to a couple minutes each. I want to really try to get through these.
I'll make it quick. So fragmented sleep is fairly new to me. Like I just developed it like past 4 to 6 years, and it basically like I wake up every 30 minutes to an hour and mostly just roll over and fall back asleep. Sometimes like I wouldn't even know I'll wake up, like I'll have a conversation with my wife and I won't remember it. The one thing that I've found that's helped, I've started to see somebody, and they've had me doing some cognitive behavioral therapy, and that seemed to have helped with my fragmented sleep and insomnia.
And then Alicia.
Okay, so
Actually, Sabrina, rather. Sorry about that.
sorry.
Hold
Go
on
ahead,
one second. I want us to keep our order.
So this is something I've really been struggling with lately. I'm probably waking up every 90 minutes to 2 hours of late, which I'm not enjoying, I have to say. And I move into and out of dreams really easily, which means I don't really trust reality because I don't always know when I'm awake and when I'm dreaming and when it's a blend of the two, which is really fun. Like when I run out of the house saying, what's wrong, because I think my mom was outside screaming and she's like, nothing. What? What's your problem? I'm like, oh, never mind, you're good. That was a dream. Go about your business. I'll go back to my own house now. We live on the same property. That's how I can have that happen. But I just can't stay asleep. I wake up, I do things. I get up and apparently get crackers out of the cupboard at 2 in the morning. So I wake up in the morning with crackers in my bedroom. Why are there crackers here? I don't know why there's crackers here. But it had to be me because the dogs don't know how to get in the cabinet, so it had to be me. I also have really vivid dreams, so I'm really restless. I have restless legs and periodic leg movements, but it's worse than that. I act out my dreams, so I hurt myself, like scratching myself in the face, throwing myself out of bed. It's really fun to explain to a doctor how you sprained your arm in your sleep by throwing yourself out of bed. Things like that get really fun to explain over and over again. So yeah, that's all part of my fragmented sleep, is acting out dreams, getting up, doing stuff. My poor dogs also suffer from narcolepsy just because they live with me. They have to sleep a lot during the day because they don't get a lot of sleep at night. They don't understand what's going on. Yeah.
Who in the room, in the audience, that cares to raise their hand for sleep eating? So, like what the story she describes. Before medication,
baby
sleep
walks
eating.
For my cupboard.
after medications, like a medication side effect or anything?
I don't have nighttime meds either, so
All right.
that might be something.
And Helicia,
Yes. So, over the years, because I've had narcolepsy a long time, folks. So over the years, I kind of found a way to kind of trick my body to get from 4 to 6 hours of sleep. It's a nice little trick. But anyway, sometimes though the trick don't work. And I can be asleep for 3 to 10 minutes and think I've been asleep for half an hour to an hour. Now how I know how long I'm sleeping is because I'm always looking at my watch. Okay, what time is it? And then if I wake up again, how in the world, that's only 10 minutes? I could have sworn I've been asleep for 30 minutes. And then sometimes I'll sleep 2 hours, which is really the norm for the fragmented sleep. And then I'll just turn over to the other side. But I can immediately go back to sleep because I have narcolepsy. And so, but that 3 to 10 minute thing is really just weird because then I get upset because I want my sleep. And then I'm going like, how am I feeling like I'm sleeping for half an hour to an hour and it's only 3 or 10 minutes? And then if I sleep for 4 hours, then I don't want to get up in 4 hours. So I tell myself, you're going back to sleep, you're not getting up, and then I go back to sleep. But then if I don't get the hours right, then when I finally do get up, I am exhausted and very tired. So, like I said, a lot of times my tricks work, but sometimes they don't.
thank you for that. Thank you for that. All right, so if without further ado, we're going to cover our last 2 symptoms of the pentad, sleep-related hallucinations. So I'll keep it really short here. So, actually, I got 2 plugs here. One, this is reported in the general population to happen maybe 10%, 40% prevalence in the general population. So it's quite common in the general population. In narcolepsy, that wide prevalence, again, you see 30 to 80% of patients with narcolepsy experience sleep paralysis and or hallucinations. How do I ask it clinically? I don't know that it's right, but as you're falling asleep or waking up, do you see anything, feel anything, hear anything that's really not there? A hallucination. That's how I ask it. Who in the room has trouble with, at some point, hallucinations, sleep-related hallucinations? A fair number. Okay. And paralysis? Together? Do you get sleep paralysis and hallucinations together? And folks, look around when I ask these questions. That's important for the rest of today, tomorrow. This is how you learn from each other. All right, so without further ado, I said something. I did my job up here. I'm going to hand it over to the patients. This is going to be none other than Helicia, and then Ryan's going to talk about it.
Okay, so.
Oh, is that right? Actually, I misspoke. Chris, you can talk about hallucinations, and then Sabrina. Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah. So hallucinations, I get the, I vary from the minor, like I think I see something out of the corner of my eye, it's not there, or audio, like I'll be the only one in the house and I swear I hear music downstairs kind of thing. But I also, for me, my most debilitating symptom I feel for narcolepsy is my hallucinations before I'm about to fall asleep. I mean, it at work it got so bad that I couldn't remember what was real, what wasn't. I didn't know if I had a conversation with somebody. I swore I had a conversation with somebody, but I didn't. Thought I sent emails. Biggest problem was when I'd be typing on the computer, and if I started going in a dream, I'd sit there and either type gibberish or start typing out my dream. And I wouldn't notice that until, a couple weeks later when I'm looking through my paperwork. And really, I worked with dangerous gases, flammable, toxic, so that was not safe. So I had to stop. That's really the point. That and I couldn't drive anymore were the points that I decided I needed to stop working.
Yeah, and it's important. So typically in narcolepsy, the hallucinations are more visual in nature. Just as a generalization, that's not to say that if you have an auditory hallucination that you don't have narcolepsy. But you can immediately sense as a clinician and as a patient or caregiver trying to disentangle this overlap between psychiatric illness and narcolepsy. Hallucinations, can by definition occur in schizophrenia. So I've had patients that I've seen that have this diagnosis, or their other doctors are considering that. But is it around sleep? Is it when you're really sleepy? Struggle? Is it at the computer when you're dozing? Is that when you're having the hallucination? Okay. Sabrina.
So I get visually the biggest one is when I'm really tired. I get where I'm convinced I see a spider skittering on the side. I tear up the sofa because I know it's there. I just saw it. Or I see it in bed, and so I tear the bed apart because I'm not sleeping with a spider. I don't want to go to Kaiser. But it's just the hallucination where I see the things out of the corner of my eyes. But I see them a lot. It bugs me. And then I also get the auditory where I live in a cottage in the country with my dogs. I know there's nobody there. I know there's no radio playing, but I sure hear it. So I'm trying to figure it out. And I really thought I was going crazy until in our support group people started talking about hearing the music and things, and I was like, oh, thank God. Because even knowing I had narcolepsy, nobody talked about you can have auditory hallucinations, so I was thinking, like, great, narcolepsy's drove me mad. But it's nice to know that hearing things can be part of it too.
And
But makes you not trust your brain a lot.
And then our last topic is going to be the sleep paralysis. And so we'll have Lucia go and then Ryan go. And then if you want, once Lucia goes, if you guys have questions, I encourage questions. Ask this panel. That's who the questions should be directed to. I'll chip in if needed, but line up at the mics and with questions, and we'll have about 10 minutes. And so, Alicia, you want to just talk about sleep paralysis?
Yes. So, a lot of times I'm in the sleep paralysis. Well, it can be either when I'm getting up, and then I'm sitting on the side. I finally made it over to the side of the bed, and I'm going like, okay, you got to get up and get ready. And then I'm telling myself like, I know. And then I'm steady sitting there, just waiting for my legs to move. And I'm just sitting there, and then I might take a deep yawn or something, like you have to get up. So I'm having this conversation with myself, trying to make myself move, but I'm not moving until my body is ready to move. And then you can be sitting somewhere as in a paralysis state, and a person can tell that you're sleepy, and they say, why don't you get up and go to bed? And I'm going, and I'm still just sitting there waiting for my legs to move, but they're not working until they're ready to work. So if you see somebody in that state, just leave them alone, and eventually they'll get up, because trust me, they really want to, but they just can't. Give you some time.
So my first experience with sleep paralysis began, I think I was around 14 years old, and I remember like after experiencing that, I had, told my mom about it, and she was like, oh, it's definitely sleep paralysis. Like, I had it when I was younger, your granddad has it. So I, was able to identify what it was, though I didn't really know that it, the underlying, or what was really underlying behind it. And so I would say, like, since being diagnosed with narcolepsy, I've luckily not experienced as many sleep paralysis episodes. They were a lot more exacerbated prior to being diagnosed, whether that's just having to do with my lifestyle choices or even medication. Though when a lot of these episodes did happen at one point, they would be very, very intense and often associated with hallucinations, and would happen as I would be going to sleep. And kind of just over time, I've had to train myself, like, in those moments to really just like, stay present and calm myself down, and know that like that I can like almost trick myself to get out of these moments. And whether it's like wiggling your fingers or toes, like for me at least, that works. So I think a lot of it, even though I absolutely, hate these experiences, I've definitely been able to somewhat, adapt from them when they do happen unexpectedly.
I'm gonna try
And
that out.
so everyone, questions, please ask a couple questions of the panel. And then panel, thank you so much for doing this. And but most importantly, do you guys have anything else to share to this beautiful audience? Because you agreed to do this. Anything else that you wanted to tell the panel, tell the audience?
My longest paralysis time was 4 hours.
Wow.
4 hours. That was not fun.
Here we go. We have a question. Thank you so much to the panel. Let's give them a round of applause, please. All right, questions over here. No.
Now is it on? Okay. All right. Okay. I hurt you, my peeps. I love you. I'm just a mom, but I keep hearing over and over and over. Everybody always says laughter and happy emotions are what trigger cataplexy. So. I am not associated with you. Okay. Our experience with cataplexy, even when it was status cataplexy with hundreds of full body drops a day, not only was laughter not triggering cataplexy, she was using laughter to stay alert. She was playing The Three Stooges. She was playing Saturday Night Live. She was playing Monty Python on loop, trying to use it to stay alert. And I've heard of people who, when they go to see a sleep specialist, they tell them a joke, and if they don't hit the ground, they rule out narcolepsy. So I'm just wondering, do we just have an oddball situation? It took a while to figure out even if there were triggers. It ended up being first sensory overload. And then we started developing, we refer to it as voice cataplexy. If there's like an overwhelming emotion, generally not positive emotions are fine. Any sort of anxiety, upset, frustration, lose the ability to speak. We refer to it as voice cataplexy, and I don't know if it's just unique to our household.
That right there, the voice cataplexy, is something I feel like I've been dealing with. I just never knew anybody else that dealt with that. I mean, I'm kind of getting it right now a little bit. But in regards to the cataplexy, I have also had like extreme anxiety trigger my cataplexy. So not just happiness and stuff or laughter.
Shouldn't surprise you, but I think I'm really similar to that. Carrie and I are kind of twins, so of course similarities there, and the overwhelm and the losing the voice. When I get really overwhelmed, I lose my words, I stutter and things like that, but also just not being able to really have a voice, which voice is hard for me anyhow. You probably already picked up. I'm kind of quiet, so yeah.
We're going to go back and forth. Thank you guys for sharing that. Go over here.
Hello. Is it? Okay, thank you. I wanted to know if y'all felt like scheduled naps and scheduled sleep schedules, does that work for everybody? Because my daughter doesn't seem to necessarily get a lot out of naps, and she tries to avoid them. And then I've heard some people who obviously are not in high school, but can sleep 2 hours, wake for 3, sleep 2, and they do that 24-hour cycle. So I was curious what y'all thought.
I don't think anything works for everybody, but speaking of,
For me, I try to avoid the naps because if I can make it through by doing my other little tricks to stay awake, then at night I can get those 4 hours of sleep instead of 2. So that's why I try to avoid the nap. But if I'm really busy and like maybe by Thursday or Friday and all my projects have been completed, then I'm tired and my body just make me go to sleep anyway. But especially on Sunday, 3:30 to 4:30. But I try to avoid the nap because I can get my extra 2 hours of sleep in.
Got it.
and I try to have a scheduled nap because otherwise my body's going to crash in the evening because I'm not making it till later at night. So I try to have one in the afternoon because I'm going to do it at some point. So Might
Thank
as well
you.
make it planned.
Thank you.
And then over here, we have a question.
Hi. So first of all, just like seeing how tired you are, just like sitting up there makes me want to go like, do you guys need like a coffee or a tea or something? But my question is, as someone who actually, before my diagnosis, couldn't nap, has cataplexy, and tends to have narc naps, where I can kind of still hear what's going on, who thought the first cataplectic attack they had was actually sleep paralysis. How do you tell the difference between the everything? If that makes sense.
So differentiating the cataplexy from the sleep paralysis.
Between naps, cataplexy, sleep paralysis, narc naps, and the other weird paralysis things that happen.
Somebody say something.
Any takers? I mean, the one thing I can say is this, with rebound cataplexy, sometimes you can get a cataplectic episode and then that can transition into sleep. Certainly that can be. But differentiating them, I have to look to my panel, how they kind of...
I call it a nap if I plan to do it.
There you go.
I don't know, it's something else. But that's just my own thing.
Yeah.
It's a nap if I go do it.
In regards to you saying we all look tired, I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm actually missing my normal nap time right now.
Oh, shucks. Thank you for serving on this panel.
Yep.
Let's switch over to here.
So a couple of you or a few of you talked about dropping things, and I don't think I've ever really thought about that, and it's happening more recently than ever before, but I just attribute it to like me flubbing or not grabbing something as tight. So what does that feel like? Like, how do you differentiate, like, you just literally drop something versus it involuntarily dropping?
Well, like I could one time when I really had it kind of bad, then I would like be taking something out of the dishwasher, and I could swear it's in my hand, and then all of a sudden it's out of my hand, and then I had to do this little trick. If I had something light in one hand and something heavy in the other, I had to put the light object down first. Otherwise, if I put the heavy object down, the light one's going to drop automatically. So it was like, it's not, for me, it just happened.
It just happened. And was it triggered by any sort of emotion, or
I
does
was
that just
tired.
happen more? Okay,
I was
just
really
exhaustion.
tired. Yeah, I was tired.
I guess I'll
And
just have
so
to
when
pay
I'm
more
real
attention.
tired, I try not to do certain things, because then I know I could drop something, or if I'm cooking, I can go to sleep and have to buy a new set of pots because I didn't set the loud timer. So yeah, if you're real tired, and for me, I can feel it in my arms and sometimes on my face, like a little fuzzy. So that's how mine works.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Over here.
I've not
1 minute.
heard.
We'll have 1 minute.
I've not heard or anything about two symptoms. One is the excuse me, the lack of energy and the surplus of tiredness, and the second is brain fogginess. Are these no longer symptoms
they're
of
there.
They're there.
narcolepsy?
They're there.
They're just not what were on the points for us to talk about. Like for me,
I'm sorry, could you speak up, please?
Yeah, sorry about that. Like, brain fog is huge for me. It just wasn't
On the
one of the bullet points we're supposed to, I don't know if brain fog goes in with EDS or whatever, but yeah, I know for me, brain fog is huge.
Yes.
In brain fog, we don't have a way to measure it. If you come up with a way to measure that, share it with everyone. It's a challenge. And what is it? How is it different from sleepiness, fatigue? Is it a cognitive issue?
Yes.
We're at a loss, but everyone says that.
Yes.
And then Dr. Mignot will finish it off here, and then we'll stop.
I don't know if I will finish it off, but I just want to point out that we hear all these different people that have different experience about their narcolepsy, and I just want to say that that's why you need to have a good doctor, because narcolepsy doesn't behave the same way in everyone. There's absolutely no doubt. I will give you a couple of examples. Like, for example, there is in China, I found there were two monozygotic twins, two twins. They were absolutely identical, a little bit overweight, And then one of them had cataplexy and everything and was like terrible, affected and so forth. And the other had practically no symptoms. And then when we just looked at their levels of hypocretin, orexin, both of them were 0. So one of them had the same disease, but almost didn't feel many symptoms, and the other was like very bad with a lot of cataplexy, etc. So, the disease can have a lot of different gradients, and also it can manifest differently. 2 days ago, I had another case, an older gentleman who was like reporting that he's not tired at all during the day, and he's saying that he's not sleepy, but he has terrible cataplexy, always kind of, everything triggers it. And then we know that he has 0 hypocretin, and yet when we do the MSLT, he sleeps only 2 hours. But that's what he says, so we don't really know. That's always another problem. And then we did the nap test, and he fell asleep in 2 minutes and had SORAM in every naps. So there is a huge variation in how people perceive the disease, express it, how severe it is. You can see everything, and I think that's where you have to have a good doctor that can kind of help to figure out what's likely to be biochemical, what's likely to be part of the personality, how it interacts to each other. And I also want to, last thing,
Yes.
I see this divide between people, narcolepsy type 2 and narcolepsy type 1, which in some ways is good because we know that the cause is generally different, but the treatment is often very similar. And, patients who have narcolepsy type 2 have also, an idiopathic hypersomnia for that matter, also have a serious problem that needs consideration, can be treated with a similar medication. It's not like having a lesser form of narcolepsy to have cataplexy or no cataplexy. So I just wanted to make these 2 remarks, but I don't know.
Thank you, Dr.
Resist,
Vignol. If you have atypical symptoms, really atypical symptoms, having a good sleep doc, yes. Number 2, HLA, I'm not going to answer this for you, but engage your treating doctor, your physician about HLA. Should I get HLA? If you want to know your prognosis, if you really want to get to the bottom, do I have type 1? Do I have orexin deficiency? And there is a commercially available CSF orexin test available. It's easy to order. Your doctor in your office just has to order it. And you have to agree to undergo a lumbar puncture. But if it's all atypical symptoms, then ask for further testing. That's it. And most importantly right here, these people right here, give them a round of applause.
Yeah, thank you so much to the panelists. I'm struck by what Dr. Ruoff said, which is learn from each other, and it was fantastic that they were willing to share. I can only encourage you, as the doctor did, to keep sharing with each other as you go through the weekend. So that's great. 2 things. Please fill out the survey that's on your table for this session. And we will be back in 5 minutes, and we will start the next session, which is youth and narcolepsy. Thank you.